The courtroom in Cedar Hollow, a small Midwestern town in the United States, had a stillness that felt heavier than silence. It was the kind of quiet that pressed against the walls and settled into people's chests, making even small sounds feel out of place. A ceiling fan hummed faintly above the polished wooden benches, and the old clock on the wall ticked louder than it should have. Every second felt stretched, as if time itself was waiting for something it could not yet name. At the front of the room, the judge adjusted his glasses and scanned the file before him. His expression was neutral, practiced, but his eyes carried a hint of weariness. This case had already passed through his courtroom twice, each time leaving behind more questions than answers. It was not supposed to be dramatic today. It was meant to be procedural, formal words, legal steps, and then an adjournment. Along the left side of the courtroom sat the prosecution team, papers neatly stacked, pens aligned. On the opposite side, the defense table looked equally prepared, though the man seated there kept shifting in his chair. His foot tapped the floor, stopping only when he seemed to realize others might notice. He avoided looking around the room, staring instead at the polished surface of the table as if it might offer him shelter. Near the aisle, beside a uniformed police officer, lay a German Shepherd K9 named Rex. Rex was large, his black and tan coat well-groomed, his posture disciplined even while lying down. His head rested between his front paws, eyes half-lidded but alert. Years of training had taught him how to disappear into the background, how to be present without drawing attention. To most people, he looked calm, almost sleepy. Only his handler knew better. Rex missed nothing. The officer holding the leash sat upright, one hand resting loosely on it. He trusted Rex completely. The dog had served with distinction, tracking suspects, detecting hidden evidence, staying steady in chaos. A courtroom was easy compared to dark alleys and tense crime scenes. Rex had been here before. He knew the rules. At the back of the courtroom, on a hard wooden bench, sat the youngest person in the room. The child was 3 years old. Small sneakers dangled above the floor, legs swinging slowly back and forth, back and forth. The child's hair was slightly messy, as if brushed in a hurry. In one tiny hand was a crumpled piece of paper with faint crayon marks, loops and lines that meant nothing to anyone else. The child's guardian sat close, one arm protective but tense, fingers clasped tightly together. No one paid much attention to the child. People assumed the child was there for logistical reasons, nowhere else to go perhaps, or simply accompanying an adult. Children did not belong in courtrooms like this, not really. They were too young to understand words like testimony, evidence, or objection. They were too young to be taken seriously. The child looked around the room with wide, curious eyes, absorbing details adults ignored, the echo of footsteps, the shine of badges, the shape of the flag near the judge's bench. The child's gaze lingered briefly on Rex, curiosity flickering, then moved on. The hearing began. The judge cleared his throat, his voice calm and measured as he called the case. Names were spoken aloud, formal and precise. Each carried weight, history, and tension. The prosecutor stood and summarized the purpose of the hearing. It was meant to address a procedural issue related to an incident reported months earlier, an incident that had left investigators uneasy and a family fractured. The facts, as presented, sounded incomplete. There had been a night. There had been raised voices. A call placed too late, officers arriving after everything had already happened. No clear witnesses, no clear confession, just fragments. Enough to raise suspicion, not enough to secure certainty. As the adults spoke, the child's legs continued to swing. The defense attorney responded smoothly, confidently. His words painted a picture of misunderstandings and assumptions. He emphasized the lack of concrete proof, the absence of reliable witnesses. His tone suggested that the case was little more than a tragic misunderstanding inflated by emotion. The judge listened carefully, nodding occasionally. Rex did not move. To anyone watching, it seemed like nothing extraordinary was happening. This was how courtrooms worked: measured voices, restrained reactions, emotions locked beneath professional masks. But beneath the surface, something unsettled lingered in the air, like a storm waiting just beyond the horizon. The officer beside Rex shifted slightly, adjusting his posture. He had worked this case before. He remembered the original call, the dimly lit hallway, the way Rex's behavior at the scene had been unusually focused. The dog had picked up something then, something that had never been fully explained. But today was not about that. Today was supposed to be simple. The judge glanced toward the back of the room briefly, his eyes passing over the benches, over the faces of observers, and over the small child. He did not linger. His attention returned to the attorneys. The child leaned closer to the guardian and whispered something unintelligible. The guardian nodded absently, eyes fixed forward, jaw tight. The child went quiet again. Minutes passed. Words continued to fill the room, but meaning felt thin, stretched too far. The case seemed to hover in limbo, balanced between suspicion and dismissal. It was the kind of moment where justice could quietly slip away, unnoticed. Rex shifted his weight slightly, ears flicking. The handler felt it through the leash, a subtle change, barely perceptible. Rex was still calm, still controlled, but something in him had sharpened. His breathing changed, deeper, more deliberate. The handler did not react. He trusted Rex's discipline. At the back bench, the child stopped swinging their legs. The child tilted their head, listening, not to the lawyers but to something else. A memory, perhaps. A sound from long ago that did not belong in a courtroom but had found its way there anyway. The judge asked a routine question, his tone casual. And then, in the space between one sentence and the next, the unexpected happened. The child shifted forward on the bench. No one noticed at first. The courtroom remained wrapped in its quiet order, unaware that everything was about to change. That truth, long buried beneath adult voices and legal language, was about to rise from the smallest voice in the room. And Rex, still lying beside his handler, waited alert, listening ready, though even he did not yet know why. The day the case first appeared in Cedar Hollow's courtroom, investigators had already spent months chasing shadows. There had been a call late at night, the kind that makes officers' stomachs knot before they even step into the unknown. A neighbor reported raised voices, a sudden thud, then silence. By the time officers arrived, the house was still, almost eerily quiet. Nothing could be proven. No one outside the house saw clearly what happened, and inside, the adults seemed more interested in protecting themselves than telling the truth. Yet, investigators could not shake the feeling that someone had been hurt. The child, barely 3, had been present during the incident. Too young to comprehend the legal or social implications, the child had witnessed more than anyone realized. No one had expected a toddler to remember, to speak, or to reveal what had been hidden. The police had thought that asking the child questions directly might confuse or frighten them. They had relied instead on indirect statements from guardians, neighbors, and the few adults willing to talk. Months passed, and the case grew colder. Evidence was fragmented, witness statements contradictory, and memories unreliable. The incident existed in the shadows of uncertainty, a puzzle with missing pieces. Back in the courtroom, the child's guardian sat quietly beside the little one, their hand resting lightly on the child's small shoulder. They had been nervous the moment the guardian agreed to bring the child to court. They had argued with themselves for days about whether this was appropriate. The court insisted the child's presence could be necessary, but the guardian could never have imagined what was about to happen. The child had been a silent observer for months, quietly absorbing details that adults overlooked. The prosecutor rose and addressed the courtroom. His voice was measured but carried an urgency he could not fully hide. He summarized the incident carefully, emphasizing what little proof existed. Months of investigation had produced nothing concrete, no clear photos, no definitive recordings, no confession. Only suspicion. His eyes occasionally flicked to the suspect, who remained stoically quiet, though tension underlined every movement. Every inch of the suspect's posture betrayed an effort to remain calm, a mask built over fear. The defense attorney countered smoothly, speaking in a tone that was both confident and persuasive. He painted a picture of miscommunication, misinterpretation, and exaggeration. He argued that circumstantial evidence could not hold up under scrutiny. His gestures were precise, rehearsed, convincing enough to give pause to anyone unfamiliar with the facts. His words were like a shield, hiding the cracks in the story that only a child's memory could fill. The judge, ever careful, listened closely. His fingers drummed lightly on the bench, a rhythm that kept time with the tension filling the room. He knew the limitations of the case. Without direct evidence or reliable testimony, there was only so far the law could go. He could order further investigation, but he could not compel certainty where none existed. And then the child stirred. No one noticed at first. Small movements of a 3-year-old rarely attract attention in a courtroom. Legs swung lazily beneath the bench, and the child adjusted the crumpled paper in their tiny hands. But beneath the surface, the child's mind had been quietly piecing together fragments, forming connections that adults had dismissed or overlooked. 3-year-olds often notice details adults do not. A smell, a sound, a look. These became crucial threads of memory, woven into a tapestry of truth that adults could not yet see. As the prosecutor continued, the child's eyes suddenly fixed on the suspect. The gaze was unbroken, innocent, yet unwavering. The guardian glanced down nervously. "Sit still," they whispered softly. But the child barely heard, too absorbed in the recollection building inside their mind. Memory is unpredictable, especially for a child, but sometimes clarity emerges when least expected. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. The suspect's foot shifted on the floor, eyes darting subtly toward the child, sensing something without understanding what. Lawyers continued speaking, yet their words began to fade into the background. The child had begun to remember the details of a night that had long been buried in fear and confusion. The child spoke, almost under their breath, first as fragments, a string of words that seemed inconsequential. "Loud fell, hurt." The guardian stiffened. The words were tiny, imperfect, and childlike, but they were unmistakably connected to the night in question. The courtroom, filled with adults trained to analyze, debate, and scrutinize, barely noticed. Only the officer with Rex registered the subtle change immediately. Rex lifted his head slowly, ears twitching. He remained seated, but his muscles tensed. The low, barely audible growl began at his throat. The handler's heart skipped a beat. This was the reaction Rex had been trained to display when sensing stress, fear, or danger connected to a prior experience. The dog's instincts were impeccable. He could sense threats, lies, and tension that even seasoned officers sometimes missed. Meanwhile, the child's words grew slightly clearer. The sentences were broken, innocent, yet direct. "He hit, loud noise, mommy cried." The guardians froze, unsure whether to interrupt, afraid of what might unfold. The judge paused mid-sentence, looking over the courtroom, puzzled by the sudden tension. Attorneys stopped speaking, sensing that the narrative had shifted in an unexpected direction. The suspect stiffened. A faint tremor ran through their hands. The carefully constructed mask of calm began to crack. Subtle cues, almost imperceptible to most, betrayed an awareness that something dangerous, truthful, was emerging. The child had spoken, and adults realized that words spoken by someone so young could carry weight adults could not ignore. Rex rose fully now, muscles coiled, eyes locked on the suspect. He moved slightly forward, restrained by the leash, but every inch of his posture communicated alertness and recognition. This was not aggression. This was instinct responding to memory, trained recognition triggered by the child's statements. The courtroom gasped collectively. A silence heavier than before fell over the room, a silence charged with anticipation, fear, and disbelief. The guardian whispered to the officer, a quiet plea, "Please, what should we do?" The officer shook his head slightly, signaling calm. He had trained for moments like this. He knew the importance of letting Rex react naturally, of not interfering until necessary. In that courtroom, for the first time in months, the case that had seemed unprovable suddenly took shape. The pieces that adults had struggled to align, fragments of memory, conflicting statements, and faint traces of evidence, began to click. The child's observations, innocent and unfiltered, were revealing patterns no one else had discerned. The K-9's reaction confirmed what words alone could not. The judge, sensing the shift, leaned forward. He had seen law, evidence, and testimony, but rarely did he witness an instinct so sharp, so immediate, validating what seemed intangible. He called for calm, his voice steady yet alert, allowing the room to process the sudden surge of clarity. Adults who had doubted the importance of the child now felt a surge of responsibility. Witnessing a toddler speak truthfully, while the police dog reacted instinctively, was something beyond preparation. Lawyers, officers, and court staff, all trained to rely on facts, documents, and procedure, were now faced with something raw, immediate, and undeniable. The courtroom atmosphere had changed irreversibly. A child's words had pierced the fog of uncertainty, and a dog's reaction had confirmed the hidden reality. What no adult could articulate or prove was now slowly unfolding. The unprovable was becoming undeniable, and all eyes, those trained to analyze and those simply present, were fixed on a truth they could no longer ignore. The small child sat back down, legs swinging lightly again, paper in hand, innocent and unaware of the impact they had just made. Rex returned to a slightly more relaxed posture, but the alertness remained. The courtroom remained frozen, suspended between past events and the revelation of the present. In that moment, everyone understood that this hearing would no longer be procedural. The smallest witness and the quietest guardian had changed everything. The case that seemed impossible to prove was suddenly moving toward clarity, guided by innocence and instinct in a way that no adult, no document, and no piece of evidence had managed to do alone. And for the first time in months, the investigation that had felt incomplete and uncertain now had direction, one that would lead the courtroom into revelations that none of its occupants would ever forget. The courtroom had barely begun to settle into a rhythm of quiet tension when the child spoke again. This time, the words were louder, clearer, and impossible to ignore. "He hit. Loud," Mommy cried. The child's small voice, trembling slightly at first, cut through the formal monotony of legal jargon, echoing off the high wooden ceilings. A few spectators shifted in their seats, surprised. No one had anticipated that a 3-year-old could say anything so pointed, so revealing. The words were imperfect, childlike, fragmented, but unmistakably pointed toward the events months earlier. The guardian's heart leapt. They had tried to shield the child from pressure, from exposure, from the weight of truth, but here it was, spilling out naturally. The guardian clutched the child's hand tightly, trying to convey calm without breaking. Every eye in the courtroom, from the judge to the officers, had turned toward the child. Even the attorneys froze mid-sentence, their words fading into the tense silence. At the front of the courtroom, Rex's ears pricked, and his entire body shifted. The growl that had been barely audible grew a little deeper, a resonant rumble that carried an unmistakable warning. He rose slowly, muscles coiled like springs, his eyes fixed on the suspect, who sat rigidly at the defense table. The subtle tremor in the suspect's hands now intensified. It was no longer just tension, it was recognition, fear, a response to a truth they had hoped would remain hidden. The handler tightened the leash gently, speaking quietly to Rex, calming the dog while allowing the instinctive behavior to continue. Rex was trained to react to danger and stress, but also to obey commands and remain controlled. Today, both instincts had collided, the dog responding not to a direct command, but to a memory triggered by the child's words. The courtroom was silent, but the tension was palpable. Even the judge, whose life was spent navigating the complex rules of law, leaned forward slightly in his chair. He had seen witnesses flinch, adults lie under oath, and people attempt to manipulate court proceedings. but never had he witnessed a toddler's voice wield such influence over the room's atmosphere. There was no questioning the power of these innocent words. They contained truth, unfiltered and undeniable. The child continued, slowly building confidence as if telling a story to an audience of one. He, angry, broke, mommy, scary. Each phrase was disjointed, hesitant, yet carried weight. The child's memory was recalling moments adults had tried to obscure, fragments that revealed a pattern of behavior. The courtroom hung on every word, straining to fill in the gaps and understand the timeline that had seemed impossible to verify. The suspect's reaction became more pronounced. His body stiffened, eyes darting toward the child with a mixture of fear and disbelief. A bead of sweat appeared at the hairline. Every subtle movement betrayed the internal panic he could no longer conceal. He had spent months confident that no witness could implicate him, that no child could recall or articulate events in a way that mattered. Now, that fragile sense of control was slipping, dissolving before his very eyes. Rex's growl deepened slightly, and he moved forward a step, pulling gently against the handler's leash. The dog's gaze never wavered from the suspect, alert and unflinching. Anyone trained in K9 behavior could see the recognition. This was not a reaction to noise, movement, or routine courtroom activity. This was pure instinct, a response to a familiar threat, reinforced by memory and training. The guardian whispered again, this time closer to the child's ear. "You don't have to say more, sweetie," they murmured, concern evident in their voice. But the child ignored the whisper, absorbed in recounting fragments from a memory that had been buried under months of fear. A child's mind processes trauma differently than an adult, and sometimes, in the simplest words, the truth emerges. The attorneys were now fully aware that the focus of the courtroom had shifted. The prosecutor leaned forward, eyes wide with recognition, signaling to the judge that these statements could be significant. He paused his prepared speech, choosing instead to observe, to listen, to allow the spontaneous testimony to reveal itself. The defense attorney, on the other hand, shifted uncomfortably, realizing that the narrative he had relied on for months was now threatened by something uncontrollable. The child's words began to form a clearer picture. He, push, fall, mommy, cry, loud, bang. The fragmented sentences were joined by gestures, small hands pointing downward, then upward, then toward an unseen corner of the room, recalling spatial details adults had overlooked. The guardian's eyes welled with tears, a mixture of relief and fear. Relief because the truth was finally surfacing, fear because they knew the impact it would have on the suspect and the proceedings. The courtroom air grew thicker. Even people who were not directly involved felt the tension pressing against them. The judge leaned back slightly, nodding imperceptibly to himself. He knew that what he was witnessing could change the course of the hearing entirely. Evidence, statements, and documents were one thing, but a living, breathing memory, articulated by a child, corroborated instinctively by a trained police dog, was something rare, something extraordinary. Rex's body tensed further, the growl vibrating through the air. The dog's reaction seemed to confirm what the child's words suggested, that the suspect had been present during the events described. The handler adjusted his grip on the leash, maintaining control while allowing the dog's response to remain visible. Officers in the room exchanged glances, noting the synchronization between child and K9. The instinct and innocence aligned perfectly, creating a kind of unspoken truth. The child's gaze remained fixed on the suspect, seemingly oblivious to the effect they were having. It was not defiance or malice, just the clarity of a memory coming forward. The small voice, so fragile yet so precise, carried details no adult had considered relevant. The sequence of events, the sounds, the movements, each word was a piece of a puzzle that law enforcement had been trying to assemble for months. The judge cleared his throat, regaining a measure of control. "Let's take a brief pause," he instructed, his voice firm but gentle. The tension in the room did not immediately dissipate. Spectators leaned forward, the attorneys adjusted their positions, and the suspect shifted nervously in the seat. The pause allowed the adults to process the unexpected testimony, to adjust their understanding of the case, and to prepare for the impact that these small, seemingly innocent statements could have. Outside the courtroom, investigators were already preparing to document the moment. The child's words, paired with Rex's instinctive behavior, offered a new avenue of clarity. Statements, previously dismissed as minor or inconclusive, now had context. Evidence that had seemed irrelevant months ago might finally be meaningful. The alignment of instinct and innocence had created a moment of revelation no legal argument could have forced. Inside the courtroom, the child remained seated, swinging their legs again, crumpled paper in hand. Rex returned to a more relaxed position but remained alert, eyes still occasionally flicking toward the suspect. The guardian exhaled slowly, trying to convey reassurance, though their mind raced with the implications. They understood that the child's voice and the dog's reaction together had shifted the entire case, perhaps decisively. This was the moment when the case, long obscured by uncertainty and lack of evidence, began to crystallize. A toddler's words and a police dog's instincts revealed what no adult witness could. Truth had arrived in its most unassuming form. The courtroom, long used to rehearse statements and controlled testimonies, was now experiencing something raw, immediate, and undeniable. And in the midst of it all, the smallest witness and the quietest hero had taken control of the narrative, steering the courtroom toward a truth that had been waiting patiently to be revealed. The unspoken understanding passed through everyone present. The investigation had changed. The hearing was no longer routine. The course of justice had shifted, guided by innocence and instinct, and there was no turning back. The courtroom had shifted from routine proceedings to something unrecognizable. The child's words still echoed softly in the high ceilings. He, push, fall, mommy, cry, loud, bang. They were short, fragmented sentences, but each carried undeniable weight. Adults strained to connect the dots, their minds racing to fill in the gaps that months of investigation had left empty. But no matter how carefully they analyzed it, they could not deny the one thing that now commanded the room's attention: Rex. Rex had risen slowly, muscles coiled like springs, ears pricked, eyes fixed unwaveringly on the suspect. The dog was no longer lying passively beside his handler. He was alert, tense, a living instrument of instinct and training. A deep, resonant growl began to emanate from him, vibrating through the polished wooden floor. This was no ordinary growl. It was the kind that law enforcement officers recognized immediately, a response tied to memory, to scent, to recognition of danger. The handler's grip on the leash tightened slightly, but he did not command Rex to sit. He understood the importance of this instinctive response. Rex had been trained for months, even years, to respond to stress cues, to recognize individuals involved in violent situations, and to act as a nonverbal witness when human testimony was insufficient. Today, instinct and truth collided in a courtroom where logic alone had failed to uncover the facts. The suspect's face paled. A bead of sweat ran down the temple, and fingers drummed nervously against the defense table. He shifted slightly in his seat, a futile attempt at composure. The careful mask he had maintained for months was crumbling in real time. The child's words alone had been unsettling, but now, paired with the unwavering gaze of a trained K-9, the implications were impossible to ignore. Every officer in the courtroom, every attorney, and even some of the spectators could sense it. The dog's reaction validated the memory of the child in a way no adult argument could. The judge, initially maintaining a calm demeanor, leaned forward. He had seen evidence and testimony that challenged the limits of the law, but the combination of instinct and innocence was unprecedented. He called for silence, his gavel tapping lightly against the bench, though the room was already nearly silent with tension. "Let's allow the child to remain seated. Everyone remain calm," he instructed, voice firm but steady. The guardian tightened their hold on the child, whispering reassurance, though their own heart was racing. They had come to court expecting to witness procedural formalities, nothing more. They did not anticipate their child becoming the center of a revelation powerful enough to shift an entire case. The child, oblivious to the magnitude of the moment, held the crumpled piece of paper, their small fingers tracing the faint scribbles absent-mindedly. Rex's growl intensified and he inched forward slightly, restrained only by the handler's firm grip. His eyes never left the suspect. Every muscle in his body radiated alertness, precision, and focus. This was not aggression, it was recognition. Officers who had worked closely with Rex recognized the exact posture, the rigid body, the low growl, the steady stare. It was a signal of confirmed identification. The dog had recognized the suspect as someone directly connected to a violent incident. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Spectators exchanged startled glances. Some had no idea why a dog's behavior could hold such significance, but the trained officer's reactions made it clear. This was extraordinary. The courtroom atmosphere was now electric with tension, every heartbeat seemingly louder than the last. The suspect tried to regain composure, but his hands shook visibly, tapping nervously against the polished wooden table. The defense attorney shot him a quick, nervous glance, realizing that no amount of legal maneuvering could counter what was unfolding. The careful web of lies and omissions that had been constructed over months now seemed fragile, as if one wrong move could shatter it completely. The child, sensing the sudden attention but not understanding its full meaning, tilted their head toward Rex. There was a quiet connection between the two, innocence and instinct, memory and training, an unspoken alignment that stunned the courtroom. Even the judge leaned slightly forward, as if trying to absorb the reality of what he was witnessing. Words had power, but here, instinct had just spoken louder than any testimony could. The officer beside Rex spoke softly, maintaining control over the dog while acknowledging his reaction. "Rex recognizes this individual," he murmured under his breath, almost to himself. "This is the same suspect from the original scene. He's confirming the child's statement." The room seemed to hold its breath. Lawyers paused mid-sentence. Witnesses, spectators, and court staff all felt the weight of the moment. Even for those unfamiliar with K-9 training, it was clear that something extraordinary was happening. The combination of a child's unfiltered memory and a dog's trained instinct created a level of proof that no one had expected. The judge motioned for the attorneys to remain seated and called for a brief recess. "We need to ensure proper procedures," he explained, though his voice was tight with tension. "This testimony, unexpected though it is, must be handled carefully." The courtroom began to stir, but the energy was nothing like before. It was no longer a room filled with procedural monotony. It was a space where truth had quietly, unexpectedly emerged. The suspect slumped slightly in his chair, pale and visibly shaken. He avoided eye contact, but every subtle movement betrayed growing anxiety. He had thought the child's presence insignificant, words unlikely to matter, and the dog's role trivial. He had been wrong on every count. The court now had two witnesses, the child with innocent but precise recall and Rex, whose instincts had validated the child's observations. Outside observers could feel the intensity, though they could not articulate it. The room seemed charged, as if reality itself had shifted. This was the point where the case, long mired in ambiguity and contradiction, began to crystallize. Evidence previously dismissed could now be reevaluated in the light of these living confirmations. Truth, previously elusive, was revealing itself in a way that no human strategy or argument could produce. The guardian whispered again to the child, "It's okay, sweetie. Just stay calm." Their words were protective, but also filled with awe. They realized that what had begun as a routine court appearance had transformed into a defining moment, one that would be remembered for years in the town's small legal history. Rex, still tense but obedient, returned to a sitting position beside the officer. His eyes, however, never left the suspect. The message was clear. Instinct had confirmed the memory of the smallest witness in the room, aligning perfectly with evidence, circumstance, and months of investigation. The judge called for court officers to document the scene, recording the child's statements, Rex's behavior, and the reactions of everyone present. He understood that this moment could play a crucial role in the proceedings. What had begun as a simple hearing had evolved into a pivotal point where innocence and instinct combined to create an undeniable narrative. The suspect's composure was gone. Beads of sweat formed on his forehead and his breathing became shallow. The careful facade he had maintained was falling apart. He shifted in his seat, subtly moving closer to his attorney, but it was too late. The room had already witnessed what could not be unseen. As the recess began, the courtroom staff and officers spoke quietly among themselves. "I've never seen anything like it," one whispered. The child spoke and Rex reacted instantly. "This changes everything." The guardian held the child's hand as they left the bench for the short break. The child remained quiet, seemingly unaware of the profound impact of their words. The crumpled paper still rested in tiny hands, an insignificant object to the child, but a symbol of revelation for the adults around them. By the time the court reconvened, every adult present knew something extraordinary had occurred. The case, once mired in ambiguity and conflicting reports, had a new direction. The alignment of the child's memory and Rex's trained instinct offered clarity that no document or testimony alone could provide. The stage was set for the next phase. What had started as routine had transformed into an intricate dance of truth, instinct, and innocence. The courtroom now awaited the unfolding consequences, testimony that would solidify the child's observations and reveal the full story, with Rex silently ensuring the truth could not be denied. In that moment, everyone understood. The hearing was no longer ordinary. The smallest witness and the quietest hero had taken control, steering the courtroom toward revelations no one could have predicted. Justice was awakening in a way that was sudden, undeniable, and deeply compelling. The courtroom had barely regained its rhythm after the brief recess, yet the tension lingered, thick and heavy. The small child sat quietly on the bench, legs swinging, hands clutching the crumpled paper. To the untrained eye, it seemed like ordinary fidgeting. But for those who understood what had just happened, the significance was impossible to ignore. The child had spoken fragments of truth months in the making, and Rex, the trained K9, had reacted instantly, his body and instincts confirming details no human witness could verify alone. The prosecutor leaned forward, resting his hands on the polished wood of the table. His mind raced. The child's words had provided crucial insight, but it was Rex's reaction that elevated the situation from possible circumstantial evidence to compelling support. The dog had been present at the original investigation, trained to recognize threats, violent behavior, and familiar scents connected to crime scenes. Every officer in the room understood what this meant. Instinct had just spoken. The suspect sat frozen at the defense table. For months, he had relied on carefully constructed lies, alibis, and a false sense of security. He had believed that no child could remember the night in question, that no physical evidence could link him, that justice would remain elusive. Now all that confidence had crumbled. Beads of sweat formed on his temple and his hands twitched. His breathing was shallow. Every subtle micro-expression betrayed the growing panic within him. The defense attorney whispered under their breath, attempting to calm the suspect while simultaneously reassessing strategy. Words seemed useless now. The combination of a child's memory and a police dog's instinct was far more convincing than any legal maneuver. The carefully prepared arguments that had dominated weeks of planning suddenly seemed fragile, almost irrelevant. Meanwhile, the courtroom officers and handlers began to piece together the magnitude of what had occurred. They exchanged quick glances, subtle nods acknowledging the rare alignment of innocence and training. One officer muttered softly to another, "I've seen Rex respond before, but never like this in a courtroom. He's confirming the child's words. That's big." Rex remained alert, though he lowered himself slightly closer to the floor, maintaining a watchful posture. His eyes never left the suspect. Every subtle movement he made spoke to the officers who knew him well: recognition, alertness, and confirmation. The child had triggered a memory in the dog, one that connected directly to the events the suspect had tried to hide. The alignment was uncanny, almost eerie in its precision. The judge, observing quietly, understood the necessity of proceeding carefully. He called for calm and addressed the courtroom. This testimony, though unexpected, must be documented thoroughly. We need a clear record of statements and reactions. Let's ensure all proper procedures are followed. His words were measured, but the underlying tension was impossible to ignore. He knew the court had just witnessed a pivotal moment. Child, oblivious to the gravity of the room, began drawing tiny circles with a finger on the crumpled paper. Their small voice, when it came, was soft but intentional. "He made loud noise, mommy fall." The words were fragmented, but each one carried weight. The courtroom listened in silence, absorbing every syllable. To the untrained ear, it might have sounded like the musings of a toddler, but for the prosecutor, the officers, and Rex's handler, it was unmistakable evidence of memory recall. The suspect's body language betrayed mounting fear. He leaned back slightly, fingers gripping the edge of the table, eyes darting nervously between the child and Rex. It was clear he understood the alignment. The innocence of a child had been validated by the trained instincts of a dog. The combination was undeniable. Every subtle twitch of Rex's ears, every focused stare, reinforced what the child had said. The handler, recognizing the critical moment, whispered quietly to the prosecutor, ensuring the details were captured. "Rex is reacting to the suspect. This isn't random. He knows him. He's linking the child's statements to the suspect." The prosecutor nodded, scribbling notes and preparing to adjust the strategy for how to present this evidence moving forward. This was more than testimony. It was corroboration, instinctual verification. Attorneys, spectators, and officers all adjusted in their seats, leaning in, sensing the gravity of the moment. This was no longer just a procedural hearing. What had started as a routine step had transformed into a revelation. The child, in their innocence, had revealed fragments of the past, and Rex had amplified that revelation with instinctive precision. The room, charged with tension, felt electric, each second stretching longer as the implications became clearer. The defense attorney whispered urgently to the suspect, who barely responded. He realized that no amount of verbal maneuvering could counter the visual proof in front of the courtroom. The child's words, the dog's response, the subtle but undeniable changes in the suspect's behavior. All of it was aligning, pointing to a truth he had tried desperately to hide. The judge motioned for the officers to maintain control, ensuring the courtroom remained orderly while allowing Rex to respond naturally. The dog's instinctive recognition could not be ignored. It was part of the record now. He understood that this unique combination of memory and instinct would carry weight, potentially decisive weight, in the outcome of the case. The child continued, small voice steadying as they recounted fragmented pieces of the night. "He yelled, pushed, mommy cried, loud bang." Each phrase was like a puzzle piece sliding into place. The courtroom, trained to analyze evidence and testimony, could now see a coherent picture emerging from what had once seemed chaotic and unprovable. Rex shifted slightly, still alert, still focused. His body language reinforced the sequence, confirming what the child had recalled. Officers and handlers exchanged glances, the unspoken understanding clear. The dog's reaction was a rare, instinctual corroboration of a memory that had been inaccessible through traditional means. This was more than unusual, it was extraordinary. The suspect shifted again, visibly shaking. It was clear he understood the situation had changed. The careful web of lies, the months of attempts to obscure the truth, the reliance on adults, unreliable statements, all of it had been undermined by the innocent voice of a 3-year-old and the trained instincts of a dog. The alignment was undeniable. The judge called for another brief pause, allowing the courtroom to process the rapid turn of events. The child remained seated, swinging legs, paper clutched tightly, oblivious to the power of their words. Rex lowered slightly, still tense, still alert, as if maintaining a silent watch over the truth unfolding. The officers and handlers took quick notes, documenting each reaction, each subtle change in posture, each micro-expression. They understood the significance. This moment would be referenced in reports, training, and potentially legal records. It was an extraordinary instance where instinct and innocence combined to reveal a truth adults could not uncover alone. The courtroom atmosphere had transformed completely. The once dull procedural hearing had become a stage where revelation, instinct, and memory converged. Every adult present understood that the direction of the case had shifted irrevocably. What had been months of uncertainty was now crystallizing, guided by the child's innocent recollection and a dog's instinctive confirmation. The guardian held the child's hand, exhaling slowly, trying to convey calm while their mind raced. They understood that this moment was pivotal, that the alignment of the child's memory and Rex's instincts could not only reveal the truth, but also provide protection and justice that had seemed impossible months ago. In the silent acknowledgement of everyone present, it became clear. The smallest witness and the quietest hero had combined to do what no adult had been able to accomplish alone. The courtroom, officers, attorneys, and judge alike were witnesses to something rare, profound, and undeniable. Justice, long delayed, had begun to awaken, guided not by documents, nor by careful legal argument, but by the instinct of a dog and the memory of a child. And all eyes remained fixed on the unfolding story, knowing that the next steps would determine how truth would finally emerge from shadows months in the making. By the time the court reconvened after the brief recess, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. What had been a routine procedural hearing now felt like the epicenter of a storm. The air was thick with tension, every whispered word, every subtle glance magnified by the extraordinary events that had just occurred. The small child sat quietly on the bench, hands clutching the crumpled paper, swinging their legs with innocent regularity, unaware of the impact their words had caused. Rex, the police dog, remained alert beside his handler. His posture was slightly lowered, muscles coiled, ears flicked toward every movement, every sound. He had made his recognition clear earlier. The suspect had been identified instinctively. But the dog's alertness now seemed almost ceremonial, a living testimony that reinforced the child's account. Every officer in the room noted the alignment between instinct and memory, understanding that the dog's behavior was a rare and undeniable form of corroboration. The suspect sat rigidly at the defense table, face pale, hands trembling slightly. The careful facade of composure he had maintained for months was completely gone. His eyes darted between the child and Rex, realizing that he had underestimated the power of memory and instinct. He had thought that procedural formalities and legal maneuvering could shield him from the consequences of his actions. Now he was confronted with evidence no adult could refute, a child's words validated by a dog's trained instincts. The guardian leaned slightly toward the child, whispering softly, "It's okay, sweetie. Just stay calm." The child glanced up briefly but returned to fidgeting with the paper, unaware of the magnitude of the courtroom's attention. Innocence had become a weapon of truth, piercing through months of uncertainty and fear. The judge, recognizing the extraordinary circumstances, addressed the courtroom. "We must proceed carefully," he said. His voice, calm yet commanding, carried the weight of authority. "The statements just given and the behavior exhibited will be formally documented. We must ensure that all procedures are followed to maintain the integrity of this hearing." Even in his measured tone, the judge could not hide the tension that crackled through the room. The prosecutor leaned forward, eyes bright with sudden clarity. The child's words had provided fragments of evidence. Rex's reaction had validated those fragments with instinctive precision. This combination was more than a legal curiosity. It was a breakthrough. Months of investigation that had gone nowhere were suddenly propelled forward by a living, dynamic form of testimony that no paper document or adult witness could replicate. The defense attorney whispered urgently to the suspect, trying to reassert control over the situation. But the visual confirmation, The child's detailed recall paired with Rex's unwavering attention was undeniable. Strategy seemed almost irrelevant now. The courtroom had become a theater where truth, instinct, and memory dominated the narrative. The child, small and unassuming, began to recall more fragments of the night in question. He yelled through loud bang, "Mommy fall." Each phrase was disjointed yet precise. The words were not polished, not rehearsed, but they carried weight like pieces of a puzzle sliding into place. Every subtle gesture, hands pointing, eyes narrowing slightly in recollection, reinforced the narrative. The courtroom, trained to interpret testimony and evidence, was spellbound. Rex shifted slightly, responding to the energy in the room. His body remained alert, muscles coiled, gaze unwavering on the suspect. The dog's instincts, honed through countless hours of training, complemented the child's recollection perfectly. The officers in the room noted the subtle cues: low growl, tense body, unwavering focus. It was confirmation, unspoken yet undeniable. The suspect's demeanor continued to deteriorate. His breathing was shallow, hands fidgeting uncontrollably. The defense attorney realized that their carefully constructed arguments were no longer sufficient to protect him. The alignment of the child's innocent testimony with Rex's instinctive reaction was a form of evidence that could not be easily challenged in court. It carried an immediacy and authenticity that documentation alone could never achieve. The judge called for the officers to document every detail, ensuring a clear record of the child's statements and Rex's behavior. He understood that this unprecedented combination of memory and instinct would likely be crucial in the proceedings to follow. The courtroom staff, attorneys, and observers all understood the gravity of the moment. What had started as a procedural hearing had transformed into a pivotal turning point. As the child continued speaking, fragments of memory became more detailed. "He hit, loud crash, mommy cry, hurt." The words painted a vivid, unsettling picture of the night that had long been obscured by fear and silence. The guardian held their breath, trying to maintain calm, while silently marveling at the child's clarity and courage. Outside the courtroom, investigators were already preparing to cross-reference these new details with prior evidence. The child's statements and Rex's reactions offered a roadmap to uncovering the truth. Previously overlooked footage, old reports, and minor inconsistencies now had context. What had been scattered and incomplete was forming a cohesive narrative. The breakthrough was undeniable. Inside the courtroom, tension mounted further. Spectators leaned forward, silent but captivated, understanding that something extraordinary was unfolding. Every participant sensed that justice, long delayed, was beginning to emerge in a form that was both unexpected and deeply compelling. The combination of innocence, instinct, and truth had shifted the balance irrevocably. The suspect tried to maintain composure but failed. His hands shook as he gripped the edge of the table. His eyes flitted between the child and Rex, acknowledging, perhaps for the first time, that he had underestimated both. The courtroom's focus was absolute. The narrative he had tried to suppress was now unavoidable. Rex, obedient but alert, gave a subtle growl, a low sound that seemed to reverberate through the room. Every officer understood it. This was recognition, confirmation, instinct aligned with reality. The child, without understanding the significance, had set in motion a chain of events that adults could neither control nor suppress. The judge called for calm again, emphasizing that the next steps must be procedural and careful. "We must ensure everything is recorded accurately," he said. "This hearing will reflect the extraordinary nature of today's testimony." But even as he spoke, he could not conceal the sense of awe in the room. This was no longer routine. The courtroom had become a crucible where innocence and instinct revealed a truth adults had failed to uncover. The guardian whispered softly to the child, offering reassurance while inwardly marveling at the unfolding events. "You're doing fine, sweetie. Just stay calm." The child nodded slightly, focused on the crumpled paper in their hands, unaware of the extraordinary power their words now held. The officers began coordinating quietly, preparing to document the precise sequence of events and statements. They understood the significance of recording Rex's responses in detail, noting every posture, movement, and growl. The alignment between the child's memory and the dog's instinctive behavior was a rare occurrence, one that could provide critical support for the investigation and the court's understanding of the events. The courtroom was now fully engaged. Every subtle movement, every word, every glance mattered. The hearing, meant to be routine, had become a dramatic unfolding of truth. The combination of innocence and instinct had created a form of testimony that transcended ordinary legal evidence, compelling everyone present to pay attention, reassess, and confront reality. As the child continued, fragments of memory formed a more coherent picture. He, push, fall, loud noise, mommy cried, scared. Each word, while imperfect, carried undeniable weight. The courtroom listened with bated breath, officers nodding every nuance, attorneys calculating the implications, and the judge ensuring that procedural integrity was maintained. Rex remained beside his handler, tense and focused, embodying the silent confirmation of the child's testimony. The bond between instinct and innocence had transformed the courtroom, turning uncertainty into clarity, doubt into recognition, and inaction into urgency. Justice, long delayed, was beginning to take form, guided by the smallest witness and the quietest hero. The suspect's face was now pale, and the tremor in his hands was unmistakable. His attempts at composure were failing. He was confronted not by arguments, not by documents, but by the combined power of memory and instinct, a force he had not anticipated, a force he could not control. In that courtroom, everyone understood the magnitude of what had just occurred. The procedural hearing had been transformed into a turning point, an extraordinary moment where innocence and instinct revealed truths that had long been obscured. And as the child sat quietly and Rex remained vigilant, it became clear that the path to justice had shifted irrevocably. The courtroom had transformed into a stage where fear and truth collided. The small child sat quietly, crumpled paper clutched in tiny hands, legs swinging, utterly unaware of the impact they had on everyone around them. Their fragmented words, "he push, fall, mommy cried," had already shifted the course of the hearing. Yet the tension was far from over. The suspect's fear, once subtle, had now escalated into near panic. Every subtle movement of the suspect was magnified in the eyes of the courtroom. His foot tapped nervously beneath the table, hands trembling slightly, eyes darting between the child and Rex. The once calm mask of composure was gone, replaced by the almost visible weight of dread. He understood, in a way that words could not capture, that the smallest witness and the trained police dog were now orchestrating the revelation of the night's hidden truths. Rex, still alert beside his handler, seemed almost to anticipate the suspect's growing agitation. The dog's low growl resonated softly through the courtroom, a vibration that seemed to underscore the tension. Officers trained in K-9 behavior knew exactly what it meant. Rex was responding to the heightened stress, recognizing the suspect's familiarity with the events and validating the child's recollection in real time. The guardian, seated protectively next to the child, whispered softly, "It's okay, sweetie, just stay calm." The child nodded, still swinging their legs, eyes flicking briefly to Rex as if seeking reassurance. The child's innocence was a powerful force, unshaken by the room's intensity, and in that calmness the officers and judge saw the contrast to the suspect's growing panic. The judge cleared his throat, attempting to restore order while acknowledging the extraordinary circumstances. "This hearing will continue," he said, voice measured but firm. "Every statement, every observation, and every reaction must be formally documented. We are entering a critical phase." Even as he spoke, he could not hide the tension that filled the air. He knew this moment would set a precedent, a rare instance where instinct and innocence intersected to create undeniable insight. The prosecutor leaned forward, jotting rapid notes. The child's fragmented statements, combined with Rex's reactions, had created a new dimension of evidence, one that went beyond written reports, eyewitness accounts, or forensic analysis. It was dynamic, immediate, and visceral. Months of investigation that had stalled due to lack of proof were now infused with clarity, direction, and urgency. The defense attorney whispered to the suspect, trying to maintain composure in the face of the mounting evidence. But words alone could not counter what was unfolding. The alignment between the child's recall and Rex's instinctive responses was irrefutable. Strategy now felt secondary to the reality that had emerged. The court had witnesses unlike any other, capable of confirming events adults could not fully articulate. The child's voice, soft but persistent, resumed. He, angry hit, mommy fall, loud bang. Each phrase, though fragmented, painted an increasingly vivid picture of the night in question. Small gestures, hands pointing downward, tilting the head, eyes narrowing as memory focused, reinforced the child's words. Observers could almost visualize the events as described, their minds piecing together the narrative from fragments of innocence and instinct. Rex, responsive to every shift in the courtroom, moved slightly closer to the suspect, controlled yet unmistakably tense. His gaze never wavered, muscles coiled, ears flicking to the smallest sound. The dog's trained instincts had elevated the child's recollection from vulnerable memory to tangible confirmation. Officers whispered among themselves, noting subtle nuances. The growl, the body tension, the unbroken stare, that validated the emerging narrative. The suspect's fear now bordered on panic. His attempts at composure were failing. He gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white, eyes wide. Every subtle cue, shifts in posture, trembling hands, the shallow rhythm of breathing, spoke volumes about his realization. The truth was no longer avoidable. Adults, armed with legal arguments and careful obfuscation, could not escape the combined testimony of child and dog. The judge motioned to the officers to continue observing and documenting. "Every reaction is relevant," he said. "Ensure the record reflects both statements and behavioral responses." The officers nodded, trained to interpret subtleties that could have profound legal significance. The alignment between instinctive animal behavior and human memory was rare, and they recognized the weight it carried. The courtroom, previously procedural and methodical, now felt almost alive with suspense. Every whispered exchange, every subtle movement, every glance was magnified. Spectators leaned forward, the attorneys adjusted their posture, and the judge maintained a careful watch over proceedings. This was no ordinary hearing. It was a live unfolding of hidden truth. The child continued, small voice gaining rhythm, confidence forming from clarity. He pushed, loud mommy fall, cry, scared. Each phrase connected to prior fragments, creating a narrative increasingly coherent despite its simplicity. The guardian whispered reassurance again, marveling at the child's ability to articulate what adults had failed to uncover. Rex responded subtly to each phrase, shifting forward, growling softly, acknowledging recognition of both the suspect and the sequence of events. Officers observed keenly, nodding that the dog's instincts perfectly corroborated the child's testimony. The combination created a new kind of evidence, one that was instinctive, immediate, and undeniable. The suspect's fear escalated further. His breathing became more shallow, small beads of sweat forming along his hairline. Every instinctive reaction in the room told him that there was no escape from the revelations unfolding. Months of careful planning, of misleading investigators and lawyers, had been undone by innocence and instinct. The judge leaned forward, calling for calm but understanding the extraordinary nature of the unfolding testimony. "The record must include every detail," he said. "Statements, gestures, reactions, they are all pertinent." The courtroom staff nodded, preparing to record every subtle moment, from the child's recollection to Rex's instinctive behavior. The prosecutor, recognizing the opportunity, prepared to reference prior evidence in the context of the child's statements and Rex's behavior. What had previously been dismissed as inconclusive or minor could now be connected to the living testimony unfolding before the court. The alignment of memory and instinct provided a coherent thread through scattered evidence, creating a path to clarity. The child, sensing the importance of the moment but not fully understanding it, continued recounting fragmented but precise details. He, loud, hit, mommy, floor, cry. Each phrase strengthened the narrative, painting a vivid picture that no adult testimony had fully captured. The subtle gestures, small hand movements, pointing, tilting the head, reinforced the account, creating a fuller, more tangible story. Rex remained focused, alert, and responsive. Every subtle shift in the child's recounting prompted a reaction, a growl, a posture adjustment, a subtle forward movement. Officers recognized this as confirmation. The dog's instincts were aligning perfectly with the child's memory. This rare synchronicity provided the courtroom with a type of evidence that transcended traditional documentation. The suspect, realizing the weight of what had transpired, sank slightly in his chair, trembling. Words could no longer shield him. The alignment of innocence and instinct had stripped away pretense and revealed the truth in its rawest form. Adults in the courtroom watched, understanding that this was a turning point, a moment where justice had begun to awaken. Even the spectators, previously passive observers, leaned forward, captivated by the tension. This was not simply a legal proceeding. It was a demonstration of truth emerging in its purest, most unexpected form. The courtroom had become a stage where memory and instinct revealed what months of investigation had failed to uncover. The judge signaled for continued documentation. Officers carefully recorded every movement, gesture, and vocalization. Every detail mattered. The alignment of the child's words with Rex's instinctive response was rare, powerful, and undeniable. The case, once mired in uncertainty, now had a clear trajectory. As the child continued, phrases slowly formed a near-complete sequence of the night in question. He, angry, push, fall, loud, mommy, cry, scared. Each word, each gesture, each reaction from Rex provided a layer of verification. What had seemed unprovable was now taking shape, visible to all in the courtroom. The suspect's fear had peaked. Every subtle microexpression revealed recognition, guilt, and panic. The alignment of the child's memory with Rex's instincts had stripped away the protective walls of deception. For the first time, the suspect realized that truth was not just unavoidable. It had arrived in a form that he could neither manipulate nor suppress. The courtroom held its collective breath. Every adult present understood the significance. The combination of a child's innocence and a police dog's trained instinct had created a level of revelation that traditional evidence alone could not achieve. Justice, long delayed, was finally moving forward, guided by voices and instincts that demanded to be heard. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as the final phase of the hearing unfolded. Every eye, every ear, every subtle movement had become hyper-aware of the smallest witness and the quietest hero, the 3-year-old child in Rex, the police dog whose instincts had confirmed months of investigation. The fragmented words the child had spoken, he push, fall, mommy cried, had grown into a coherent account, each piece now corroborated by the dog's unwavering recognition. The suspect's fear had escalated to a palpable, almost visible level. The judge called the courtroom to order. His voice, calm and measured, carried the weight of authority. We are now proceeding with the final portion of this hearing. All testimony and responses will be formally documented. Despite his composed tone, there was a flicker of recognition in his eyes. He knew that what had transpired was extraordinary, a rare convergence of instinct, innocence, and truth. The child, seated on the bench, swung legs rhythmically, clutching the crumpled paper that had begun this chain of revelations. Their voice, soft yet deliberate, recounted the events in fragments, each piece more precise than the last. He, angry, pushed, mommy, loud, crash, scared. The words were imperfect, yet each phrase carried undeniable weight, revealing a sequence of events adults had attempted to obscure. Rex's body remained alert and tense, coiled like a spring. Every growl, every subtle shift in posture, every focused stare was a silent confirmation of the child's account. The dog had been trained for months, even years, to respond to stress cues, threats, and memories of violence, but never before had the instincts aligned so perfectly with human testimony in a courtroom. The suspect, seated rigidly at the defense table, now trembled visibly. Beads of sweat dotted his hairline, and his hands shook against the edge of the table. The carefully constructed facade of composure he had maintained for months was gone. For the first time, he realized he could not manipulate the unfolding truth. Every instinctive reaction from Rex, every word from the child, stripped away his defenses. The prosecutor leaned forward, eyes sharp with focus. The child's testimony, once fragmented, now formed a coherent narrative that aligned with physical evidence collected months earlier. Rex's reactions provided an almost supernatural confirmation. This rare alignment between innocence and instinct allowed the narrative to move from suspicion to certainty. Every subtle detail, from the sound of a loud crash to the motion of being pushed, was verified in real time by the dog's trained instincts. The defense attorney whispered urgently to the suspect, attempting a last-minute reassurance, but it was clear that it was too late. Words could no longer counter the truth unfolding in the courtroom. The alignment between memory and instinct had created an evidentiary force stronger than legal maneuvering, documentation, or argument. The child's voice, so small and unassuming, now carried the weight of undeniable reality. The judge called for a short pause, ensuring all reactions and testimony were meticulously recorded. The courtroom staff and officers documented every micro-expression, every posture, every growl from Rex, every gesture from the child. The alignment of instinct and innocence was rare, and every detail mattered. Officers whispered quietly, "I've seen Rex work in the field, but never with such perfect synchronization with a witness." As the hearing resumed, the child continued, adding more details, phrases that painted a vivid picture of the night. "He pushed. Mommy fell, loud noise, scared, crying." Each phrase, though fragmented, was precise enough to reveal the sequence of events. The courtroom listened in silence, absorbing the narrative with a mix of awe and tension. Rex's response was subtle yet undeniable. A low, controlled growl vibrated through the courtroom, muscles tensed, ears pricked. The dog's instincts recognized the suspect, confirmed the events being recounted, and reinforced the child's words. The alignment between memory and instinct had become a living, undeniable form of evidence. Even the judge, seasoned in countless hearings, leaned forward slightly, acknowledging the extraordinary nature of the moment. The suspect's fear escalated further. He gripped the edge of the table tightly, jaw clenched, eyes wide, realizing that truth had fully cornered him. Every micro-expression betrayed panic, guilt, and helplessness. Months of lies and manipulation could no longer protect him. The courtroom had become a crucible where innocence and instinct demanded recognition, accountability, and justice. The prosecutor carefully referenced prior evidence in conjunction with the child's testimony and Rex's behavior. Physical reports, previous witness statements, and circumstantial details now aligned into a coherent narrative. What had been fragmented and inconclusive before had transformed into a clear chain of events supported by human memory and canine instinct. This rare combination created an almost irrefutable account of the night's events. The guardian whispered quietly to the child, reassuring them while marveling at their clarity and courage. "You're doing great, sweetie," they said softly. The child nodded slightly, focused on Rex and the crumpled paper, unaware that their voice was guiding the courtroom toward truth. The judge motioned for Rex's handler to allow the dog a brief, controlled approach. Rex stepped slightly forward, gaze locked on the suspect. The low growl deepened, resonating through the room. Officers and court staff understood the significance. The dog's instinctive behavior, now fully documented, served as confirmation of the child's statements. No adult witness, no document, no argument could replicate the force of this combination. The courtroom fell into an almost reverential silence. Spectators leaned forward, captivated, understanding that they were witnessing something extraordinary. This was not merely legal procedure. It was a demonstration of truth in its purest form. Innocence and instinct had converged to reveal events that had been hidden, obscured, and feared. The suspect slumped slightly, defeated. His attempts at composure were gone. Every glance at the child and Rex reinforced his helplessness. He understood fully now. He could not hide, could not deny, and could not escape the reality that was unfolding. The courtroom, officers, and judge all bore witness to the alignment of truth, instinct, and innocence. The child, sensing the importance of the moment, spoke one final time. He hit, "Mommy fall, loud cry." The words, though simple, carried an undeniable clarity. They painted a vivid picture of the events, unadorned, unfiltered, unassailable. The room held its collective breath as the final fragments of memory connected with every instinctive cue from Rex. The judge, acknowledging the rare alignment, called for formal documentation of the child's statements and the dog's responses. "This hearing will reflect the extraordinary nature of today's testimony," he said. "Statements and instinctive responses are now part of the official record." The gravity of his words resonated throughout the room. Officers quickly noted every detail: Rex's stance, growls, eye focus, and subtle movements, the child's gestures, voice inflections, and pointing, the suspect's physical reactions, shaking hands, rapid breathing, tension in posture. The synchronization of these elements created a living record of truth, unprecedented in its clarity and emotional impact. The prosecutor rose, voice steady but filled with authority. "Your Honor, with the child's testimony corroborated by Rex's instinctive behavior, we can now present a coherent and verified account of the events in question. The alignment of evidence, human memory, and trained instincts provides clarity that has been impossible to achieve through conventional means." The defense attorney's face betrayed resignation. Words and argument could no longer protect their client. The combination of the child's recollection and Rex's instinctive confirmation had created a form of evidence that transcended legal strategy. The courtroom recognized that justice, delayed though it had been, was now inevitable. The suspect's head dropped slightly. Every subtle gesture, every micro-expression, conveyed recognition of defeat. Months of deception, manipulation, and denial were undone. The alignment of innocence and instinct had revealed a truth he could neither control nor hide from. The judge called the court to order, signaling the official conclusion of testimony. "The record will reflect statements and responses as documented. Proceedings will continue, but the extraordinary clarity provided today will guide the next steps." The gravity of his words settled over the room. The child, still seated, swung legs gently, oblivious to the monumental impact they had made. Rex, beside his handler, relaxed slightly but remained alert, the silent sentinel of truth. Together, they had orchestrated a revelation no human strategy could achieve. As the courtroom slowly emptied, spectators whispered among themselves, aware that they had witnessed a historic alignment of innocence and instinct. Officers exchanged quiet nods, knowing the significance of the documentation they had captured. The prosecutor prepared for the next phase, confident that justice would be served, guided by the clarity that only a child's memory and a police dog's instincts could provide. Outside the courtroom, sunlight filtered in through tall windows. The guardian held the child's hand, smiling softly. "You did it," they whispered. "You helped everyone see the truth." The child looked up, smiling faintly, unaware of the full magnitude of their bravery. Rex, ever vigilant, followed their steps closely, instinct and loyalty guiding every movement. In that moment, justice had been awakened, not by documents alone, not by adult arguments, but by the extraordinary combination of innocence and instinct. The story that had been hidden, feared, and obscured was now visible in its purest form. The smallest witness and the quietest hero had led the way, and the world, if only in that courtroom, had finally seen the truth. And in that rare, unforgettable convergence. Everyone understood. Justice could not be denied when innocence and instinct united.